Tell me about this latest stoush from China. We've got China threatening tariffs on our grain exports into China. We've got the Prime Minister, obviously the government line, the diplomatic line saying this is a long-running dispute. There's nothing overtly linking it to the controversy over coronavirus. Is that really what's going on here, or would China, this is just China flexing its muscle because of the coronavirus controversy?
Well, I think it's convenient for them, but this is an anti-dumping case on Australian barley, which goes back some time. They claim that we're dumping barley, that is undercutting the normal market price in China. So that's a matter that can be technically examined. And not surprisingly, the barley industry deny this. But of course, it does generate the headlines on the back of the comments that the Chinese ambassador made a few weeks ago, which, you know, goes to the point that this warrior wolf diplomacy, as they like to call it, this extremely aggressive diplomacy by Chinese ambassadors in Western countries, all it does is ramp up tensions between China and Western countries. And in the end is not going to achieve anything useful in terms of China's interests or in terms of Western interests. This is completely counterproductive.
You know, there's a lot of commentary around directed criticising Scott Morrison and his government, suggesting they're inflaming tensions with China, whereas what Marise, Payne and Scott Morrison have said is perfectly reasonable. That is, we need an international investigation. They've played down any preconceptions about what that investigation might find. Do you think that where has there been overly strident rhetoric out of Australia?
Well, to be fair to the government, I think their rhetoric has been very cautious. Scott Morrison, Marise, Payne, Simon Birmingham and so on have all spoken in modest and moderate terms, just simply saying they want an international inquiry. To be honest with you, they haven't accused the Chinese government or the Communist Party of China of any nefarious activity or whatever it may be, and they haven't suggested there should be sanctions on China or that China should pay compensation for the damage caused. They haven't gone down any of those paths. And I think you'll always find in Australia, in foreign policy debates, a body of people who are commentators on foreign policy who always say Australia is in the wrong if we get into an argument with another country. This, I'm afraid, reflects something of an inferiority complex, at least in international terms, that those people have. I mean, Australia is a significant country. It's not a great power. And it has its values and it has its interests, and it certainly doesn't have to kowtow to China. It needs to deal with China, but deal with China on our terms, not deal with China on China's terms. Otherwise, the relationship will ultimately never work and never work well. So if we want it to work well, the Chinese have to understand where we come from and what we stand for and what we're about. And when I was the foreign minister, I never hesitated telling Chinese leaders what Australia was about and what we stood for and where we would have disagreements with China. And at the same time, we were happy to work with China and cooperate with China. Well, I think that's what the Morrison government has been pretty much doing as well.
What about Donald Trump?
In the wrong.
What about Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo raising the prospect of this being this virus being accidentally escaping from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? Have they unnecessarily inflamed the situation, or is it perfectly reasonable to raise these issues in the public domain?
Well, it's perfectly reasonable for these issues to be raised, but if you're the head of government or the Secretary of State, that is the foreign minister of the most powerful country in the world, and you want there to be an international investigation, it doesn't make much sense to preempt the outcome of the international investigation.
No, but see, this is the important thing. This is the interesting thing. I think people raising the prospect that the Wuhan lab could have been the source of this virus accidentally. No one's actually said that's definitely the case. People have suggested it's why we need an investigation. In fact, there's some reporting out of the US in the last 24 hours or so that shows that that lab shut down for more than 2 weeks in October. There was no phone activity out of it. Suggests it might have been shut down because there was a breach of hygiene or the like. So surely it's got to be open to investigation. Yet I noticed two of your contemporaries, two other former foreign ministers of this country, Labor foreign ministers, Gareth Evans and Bob Carr, they are happy to shoot down the lab theory. They say that it definitely didn't come from the lab. So I don't know how do they know that?
Well, I don't know how they know, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised that they do know, and in fact, I doubt they know. And I just don't think we know. There have been reports that there is intelligence pointing to this lab. There have been some people who have denied that. I frankly just don't know. And this is one of the reasons why a long time ago, weeks ago, I called for an international investigation, an impartial international investigation led by epidemiologists and international scientists from Western and non-Western countries.
Spot on.
A variety of people.
Spot on. That is exactly what we need, and perhaps not headed by Gareth Evans and Bob Carr. Sorry to cut you off, Alexander, but that's all the time we've got for tonight. So thanks for joining us. Alexander Downer there.